our attempt to form a public housing roundtable was started as a good idea and ultimately failed. What we hoped to do, we had just, out of the Salt and Light Guidebook research, we had just done 450 door-to-door surveys in 6 of our major public housing here in Knoxville. We'd learned a lot of information. We'd spent great time with all these residents and felt like we were ready to pull together everyone who cared about public housing residents in our city. We primarily were aimed at churches and nonprofits and ministries who were on the ground every week in public housing. Our thought was surely these groups should be working together because, for instance, in one public housing, if they're making forward progress, they're doing some really innovative stuff, how are the other public housing going to find out about it? How are we going to spread the good news? We didn't have a venue for doing that because it can be so consuming in one public housing. Very rarely do you get to another one if you're working in a certain one. So we started something. We started a public housing roundtable. We advertised it for several weeks. We sent personal emails and phone calls, and had about 25 or so show up at our first meeting. Turned out to be our only meeting. Not only was it Christians in attendance, but we made it. We said it was a faith-based meeting, but we want to work with non-faith-based groups. So the actual administrators of public housing attended the meeting. Very interested in what this is all about. What's going on? And of course, they were not of the same faith persuasion we were. Got mixed reviews out of the first meeting. Basically, we stood up, we went over the results of our survey so that folks could feel some of the pain that was stated in the door-to-door surveys. We tried to get us all on the same ground, and we didn't tell them we were going to start a public housing. We said, should this be what, do you all want to do this? There was some discussion about the pros and cons, and generally at the end of the evening we had a vote. Almost everybody in the room said, yeah, let's go for it. It's exciting, sounds good. The only concern was we were saying meet once a quarter, and some of them were saying we need to meet more than that. Especially work in public housing, it's too relationship based. There's not enough trust. We've got to meet more than once a quarter. We, on the other hand, were very concerned that people were so crazy busy that they said that now, but they really wouldn't. Got out of that meeting, and to this day we've not had a second meeting. Absolute failure. Now, you're obviously asking why. Those of us at the heart of organizing it got caught up in other work. It's that simple. We never got around to calling the second meeting. We had another meeting scheduled. It came at a bad time. We ended up canceling it. We canceled the next couple of meetings and never did call the meeting. We got so consumed back in our own churches and in our own work, we never did go back to this beautiful thing that emerged out of the ground called a public housing roundtable in Knoxville. Now, since then, we've been doing a lot of praying and brainstorming because we're going to recall a meeting, but there's been so much time elapsed. It's been such a horrible failure. We have to figure out a way to reinvent it and get people to re-engage their hearts who gave us the one shot and will not give us another shot, especially public housing folks and the different nonprofits. They don't give you a second shot. And so we're trying to now at this figure out how to get probably churches that are going to be part of this thing who are stakeholder churches who will not walk away. Also, in God's providence, I will say one glimmer of hope. We have got invested in. We turned our attention out of the broad public housing roundtable and focused on one public housing. And God's been doing some amazing things at this one public housing, and now we have that to share with some of the other public housing. So we see good things that God has done because we've got some stories to tell and some things we've learned. But nonetheless, that was a total failure because we never regathered the group. The lesson learned from me is we didn't have a good strategy going into it. We didn't have our stakeholders firmly identified, people who committed to it. We didn't have a management team in place. You need to have something called a management team or some group of, we're going to take this on, stakeholders, more than one more than a couple of us, there needs to be a broader team of us that takes something on as big as a public housing roundtable. So there's that story.